I travel a lot for work and have to move from one city to another quite often. A few years ago, I was moving to a city in Northern California. I was going to live there for about a year and then probably have to move again. The house that I got to rent was a nice, smaller house in a pretty normal neighborhood. It was sort of old, but I'm not picky, and I liked it just fine. Over the first few weeks of living there, everything was good for the most part. I was gone a lot with work, but when I was home, it was a comfortable place to live, and I thought the neighborhood was nice as well. Like I said before, the house was old, and it had some older-looking, kind of ugly wallpaper and designs in some areas of the house. I would have liked to take it down, but I was only renting it, so I thought maybe I would just let it be. The wallpaper was mainly in the living room, and then it went down the hallway to where the bedrooms were. One day I got a few pictures to hang on the wall, and they looked good, but I just really didn't like the way the wallpaper was looking with them, and I decided once and for all that I was going to remove it. I had to get up on a ladder to reach it, and when I did, I first looked at it closely, and right away it seemed a little bit odd. It was a black and green design, with black on the top and green on the bottom, but the texture was not like most wallpapers. I ran my hand across it, and the top part of it was extremely thin. The texture also felt different. Then, I decided to grab the top part of it and see if I could peel it off. It took a little bit of effort, but I was able to get part of it off. When I did, I noticed there was like a 3-inch tall space behind it. I kept taking it off, and the space was running right along the top of the wall. I was confused as to what this space was, and I'd never seen anything like it before. I noticed a sort of wire in the backside of it. The space also seemed to go back about 6 inches or so, and had several holes on the top, meeting between the ceiling and the second floor of the house. As I was taking more of the wallpaper off, I got about a foot of it off before I found something else too. There was a tiny little camera that was mounted behind the wallpaper at one spot. It looked like it had been set up to film inside the room. When I kept removing the wallpaper, I found another camera. I kept going and found that there was another one on the other wall as well. It seemed like they were in tiny holes in the wallpaper, with these cameras basically impossible to see unless you were right up next to them. I was shocked at what I had found, and also really creeped out. I wasn't sure at that point if someone who had lived there in the past had done this, or if my landlord had set them up. If he did, he was a real creep. But either way, I didn't feel comfortable at all with them being there, and the fact that the cameras were plugged in made it even more creepy to me. I didn't really know what to do, but for the time being, I decided to unplug all the cameras I found and put them in a box so they couldn't record anymore. I was sort of paranoid to move around the rest of the house now, because I was afraid that there were possible cameras everywhere. I decided that the next morning I would call my landlord and tell him about it. That night I fell asleep easily, but it wasn't too much later that I woke up. The first thing I heard after being awake was the sound of my front door opening. I looked around and saw that it was still dark outside. A really bad feeling came over me. I knew I had locked my door at night, so I wasn't sure what was going on. I listened and heard someone walking around downstairs. I waited in my room for a while to hear if they would go away or what they would do. I heard them for a little bit, and then I stopped hearing any kind of noises at all. I thought maybe they had left, so I slowly exited my room, and as quietly as I could, I walked down the hall and down the stairs. After I had gotten to the bottom of the stairs, I could now see that, around the corner, my landlord was inside my house. His name was Dave, and his back was facing me, so I don't think he saw me at all. I quickly went to the back of the house and left through the back door in the kitchen. Once I had made it back to my car that I had parked on the street, I called the police on Dave. Then I drove to my coworker's house, whom I had become good friends with. I ended up having to go back to the house later to talk with the police. And when I did, they told me they had caught Dave. And when they found him, he was inside my bedroom. That really gave me the creeps. And I'm glad I was able to leave when I did. The cameras were all his, and he had set them up himself. I guess when they all turned off, he came back to my house that night with the key that he had. It was a really creepy situation. When I was a kid, probably about 10 years old, my family moved into a new house. It wasn't that big of a move, but maybe like 10 minutes away from where we had lived before. My siblings and I didn't have to change schools, but the neighborhood was different. When I was a kid, I loved to be outside. Probably my favorite part of our new house was that it had a basketball hoop in the driveway. I had always wanted one, but our old driveway was too small, and the car took up most of the space. My brother and sister did not like to go outside as much as me, so I would often be out there by myself. Our house was bigger than our old one too, and the neighborhood was busier. I was hoping that I would meet some of the neighborhood kids and make some friends. I remember that shortly after moving in there, I was outside playing basketball in the driveway, and I saw a guy walking by down the street. The next day, I saw him again. I figured that he was one of the neighbors, and he lived on our block. I remember noticing that he looked at me both times as he went past. Then, one day, I saw him walking down the street for the third time. This time, the man stopped at the end of our driveway and faced me. I wasn't really sure what he wanted. I kept playing basketball and looked over every few seconds or so to see if the guy was still there. He didn't move. After maybe 2 or 3 minutes, when I looked over, the guy waved at me. I waved back, but I was a little bit confused. The guy was wearing sunglasses, I remember, and for the most part, he seemed pretty average. He then waved me over and said hi. I started walking down the driveway to the guy, and when I reached him, he asked me if my family had just moved in. I said yes, and the man told me that he was my neighbor. He asked me how old I was, and then he told me that he had a son around my age. He said he was always trying to get his son out of the house, but he mostly just liked to stay inside and play video games. He told me that his kid would probably play basketball with me and asked if I wanted to come over and meet him. It sounded good to me. I would have loved to have a friend to play basketball with, and I told the man sure, and he told me to follow him. We both began walking down the street to the right. When we did, I expected it to be maybe a few houses down or something like that. I thought about telling the man that I had to let my parents know I was leaving. They had always told me that if I was going anywhere, I should ask them or let them know, like if I was going to the local park or something. However, I felt like that would be an inconvenience, so I decided not to. We made it past a few houses, and then I saw that there was this one car parked on the side of the road. It was literally the only car that was parked on the side of the road. Most of the houses in the neighborhood had garages or longer driveways as well. There wasn't really a need to park on the street. I saw that the man was walking closer to the vehicle. This gave me a really bad feeling. Had he driven his car here? The car was a gray minivan. It was kind of old looking, I remember that. I just knew that I didn't want to get into a vehicle with this guy. My parents had always told me not to go anywhere with strangers. I thought this man was a neighbor though, and that didn't really seem like a full stranger to me. Then, as we got even closer to the van, sure enough, I remember hearing the lock click like it was unlocking. The man was holding keys. He told me to hop in when we were maybe 10 feet away. This is when I decided that I was not going to get into the guy's car. I turned right around and sprinted as fast as I could back to my house. The man did not chase after me. I think I had really taken him by surprise. I also don't think there was any chance that he would have caught me. I made it back home, ran up the driveway, and went back inside the house. For whatever reason, I didn't tell my parents about it. I think that I didn't want to get into trouble. I was much more careful when going outside after that as well. Luckily though, I never saw that man again. I believe 100% that the man didn't even live in our neighborhood at all. Last summer, I moved into a new house with my wife. We bought it for a pretty good price, and the house was ready to move in and didn't need any kind of work. One of my favorite things about it was the big yard that we got with it. We were a little more out in the country, but had over 5 acres of land, including decent-sized woods in our backyard. We knew that we could get deer in our yard quite a bit, and possibly other animals like foxes or bears as well. On just our 3rd night living there, we ran out into the little patio area behind our house, and my wife and I were sitting out as the sun set. Eventually, it became completely dark out, and we turned on the light that we had back there that shined towards the woods. We started to hear a noise coming from the woods when we did. The entrance was about 100 feet away. We saw some tree branches moving and expected to see an animal run by. But then a man started to walk out from the woods. He looked like some random guy, and he just stood there looking at us. We both stared at the man for a while, and eventually I yelled out to him, asking who he was. He kept standing there, staring at us though. I decided that it would be best to tell him he was on private property and he needed to leave, but when I did, the man didn't seem to care. He just kept standing there, and eventually he slowly walked back into the woods. I thought he was finally leaving, and when we didn't see him again for a few minutes, we went back inside for the night. I don't think the man came back at all that night, but the very next night we were both inside the house when I passed by one of the windows in the kitchen and noticed that the same man appeared to be in the entrance of our woods again. It was like 11 p.m. and later that he had been there the previous night. He was just standing there, staring at our house. I watched him for probably a whole 5 minutes. It was really strange and creepy. Eventually, I decided to open up our back door and yell at the man to leave. I walked over, and as soon as I opened it, I saw the man turn to the other direction and run back into the woods. I kept watching the entrance of the woods for a while, but I never saw him come back, and finally I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to a strange noise though. I couldn't quite tell what it was, but it sounded like water was running somewhere. I got up and went all around the house. When I made my way to the back of the house, I realized what it was. The water outside our house that was for a garden hose was turned on full blast and was flooding our little garden area. Thankfully, we didn't really have anything planted there yet, but someone had turned it on in the night, and I thought it was probably the guy that kept walking in our yard. I didn't really know what I could do though. I didn't want to call the police yet because he hadn't really done anything that bad. I decided to just keep a watch out on the backyard at night. When that night came, thankfully, I didn't see the man at all. I thought maybe he was done bothering us, and I went to bed. The next morning when I got up, I didn't hear or see any strange noises, and everything seemed to be in order until I got out to leave for work. When I got to my car, I saw that the right front tire had been slashed. Now I was really mad. Whoever this guy was, he really crossed the line. I wanted to know who he was and what he was doing. I had a little bit of time before I had to leave for work, so I decided to walk into the woods and see where this man was possibly coming from. I had walked out in the woods twice before when we were touring the property before we bought the house, but it was a really dense woods and was easy to get lost in, so I don't really remember everything. I went out, and there was sort of a walkway or unofficial path that went about 20 feet in, and then things got more narrow. I went out there, went to the left, and followed a little trail deeper into the woods. Not really sure what I was looking for exactly, but I was really mad. When I got about 2 minutes down the trail, I suddenly heard a noise about 50 feet up. I froze and looked. I saw the guy, and he was standing behind a tree up ahead. He looked like he possibly had a knife in his hand, but he wasn't looking at me. He slowly turned and started to face me, and when he did, I started sprinting as fast as I could in the other direction. I ran off the path and was running into tons of tree branches, and I probably stepped in a bunch of poison ivy. I felt as though I was running for my life, and I kept going until I was finally out of the woods and back in my yard. I ran all the way to the driveway and saw that my wife was outside and about to leave for work. I told her to get inside her car, and I got in with her. We then drove away down the street. Once we were a safe distance away, I told my wife what had happened, and we called the police. The police arrived at my house and found that the man had been living in our woods for a while. He was caught, thankfully, and I guess he clearly didn't like us living there for some reason. We were just happy he was gone and wasn't able to hurt us.